Growing up as Robert Carter's younger brother had always been a mixed blessing. On one hand, it opened doors to a world of privilege and opportunity. But on the other, it was a constant reminder of my inadequacy. No matter how hard I worked, Robert's success always seemed to eclipse mine, leaving me feeling like I was stuck in his shadow, merely an afterthought. Robert was a force to be reckoned with in New York, a self-made businessman who had built an empire from the ground up. He was the golden child, the prodigy, who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was James Carter, the younger brother whose accomplishments were always overshadowed. Excelling academically didn't matter. My grades, my achievements, my small victories, they all paled in comparison to Robert's towering success. Whenever he entered a room, I became invisible. I was exhausted by the endless comparisons, the weight of unspoken expectations, and the gnawing sense of never being enough. I knew I needed to get away, to find a place where I could carve out my own identity. After weeks of heated arguments and countless discussions, I finally convinced my parents to let me leave. I explained that I needed this, a fresh start, far from Robert's influence. That's how I ended up enrolling at University College London, UCL, one of the UK's most prestigious institutions, with an annual tuition fee of $27,000. When the day to leave finally arrived, my parents stood on the doorstep, watching me pack my belongings into a taxi. My mother clung to a handkerchief, her voice trembling as she hugged me goodbye. "Are you sure about this, James?" she asked. "Yes, Mom," I replied, forcing a reassuring smile. "I need this. I have to do this for myself." My father, ever stoic, patted my shoulder. "This is your chance to prove yourself, James. Don't let us down." I swallowed the lump in my throat as I climbed into the taxi. As we drove away, I glanced back at them, a mix of apprehension and hope swelling in my chest. For the first time, it felt like I was taking charge of my life. Arriving in London was like stepping into another world. The city was both ancient and modern, a bustling hub where history and innovation collided. The grandeur of its towering buildings, the endless crowds, the iconic red buses, and the black cabs, all of it was overwhelming yet exhilarating. I felt small, but in a way that made me believe anything was possible. My first day at UCL was no less overwhelming. The sprawling campus combined neoclassical architecture with sleek modern designs, making me feel as though I'd entered an entirely different realm. Students from around the world filled the halls, their diverse backgrounds a testament to the global reach of the university. For the first time, I felt like I was on the brink of something extraordinary. London, I quickly realized, thrived on connections. Who you knew and how you played the game determined your place in this dynamic city. Determined to succeed, I immersed myself in the social scene, attending parties, networking events, and exclusive gatherings. I met business moguls, politicians, and even minor celebrities. The intoxicating sense of belonging to a world so far removed from my life in New York was exhilarating. One of my first acquaintances was Oliver, a fellow student with an air of effortless charm and privilege. Over drinks at a rooftop bar overlooking the city, he raised an eyebrow and asked, "You're from New York?" "Yeah," I replied casually. "I needed a change of scenery." Oliver smirked knowingly. "London's perfect for reinvention. Ambition is respected here." His words struck a chord. For the first time, I felt like I was in a place where my dreams weren't diminished by Robert's looming shadow. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into this new world. I attended black tie events, dined at exclusive restaurants, and spent weekends at luxurious country estates. It was a whirlwind, but I thrived on it. London became a city of endless opportunities, a place where I could finally step out of Robert's shadow and forge my own identity. Balancing my academic pursuits with this burgeoning social life was a challenge, but I was determined to prove myself. I wanted to show not just my family, but also myself, that I was capable of success. Yet, even as I established myself, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that I was still running. From my brother, from his achievements, and from the expectations that had defined me for so long. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't just escaping Robert's shadow, I was building my own. For the first time, I wasn't just Robert Carter's younger brother. I was James Carter, a UCL student, an ambitious dreamer, and someone ready to leave a lasting mark on the world. As I navigated the complexities of UCL and London's high society, I knew I was standing at the edge of greatness. The path I was forging was mine and mine alone, and I was ready to claim it. The first few months at UCL were transformative, and I had firmly established myself both academically and socially. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was finally stepping into the light. I wasn't just another student anymore. I was James Carter, the determined American with a point to prove and a relentless hunger for success. For the first time, I felt like I was stepping out of my brother's shadow and beginning to create one of my own. I met Henry Bowman during an economics lecture. Henry had an effortless charm, the kind that turned heads when he walked into a room. Dressed impeccably in a tailored blazer and sporting neatly styled hair, he spoke with a polished British accent that almost seemed too perfect. We bonded over our shared interest in finance and our mutual dislike for the mundane aspects of student life. It wasn't long before Henry introduced me to Isabella Romano, a striking woman with an equally impressive pedigree. Isabella, the daughter of a powerful Italian media mogul, carried herself with a sharp wit and confidence that captivated everyone around her. Through Henry and Isabella, I found myself drawn into a world I had only dreamed of, a realm of exclusive events, extravagant parties, and people who could make or break fortunes with a single decision. My first true glimpse of this world came when Henry invited me to a soirée at the Savoy Hotel, one of London's most prestigious venues. The hotel's Art Deco interiors, with their gleaming marble floors and glittering chandeliers, made me feel as though I'd stepped into a different era. This wasn't just a charity gala, it was a celebration of wealth and influence, a gathering of people who exuded effortless power and privilege. As I walked into the grand ballroom, a surge of excitement coursed through me. This was the life I had envisioned, mingling with celebrities, savoring gourmet cuisine, and sipping champagne that cost more than my tuition. The room was filled with CEOs, politicians, and actors whose faces were instantly recognizable. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in a world that had always been out of reach, a world I was determined to claim as my own. It was at the Savoy that I met Edward Harrington, a venture capitalist known for taking bold risks and reaping substantial rewards. Edward, with his sharp features and piercing gaze, had an air of authority that made everyone sit up and take notice. He was precisely the type of person I needed to impress, the kind of person who could open doors I hadn't even known existed. Henry introduced us, and we quickly dove into a conversation about investments, startups, and the art of calculated risk-taking. Edward seemed intrigued by my story, how I had come to London to escape my brother's shadow and make a name for myself. "You've got ambition, James," Edward said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I like that. How would you feel about interning at my firm? We could use someone with your drive." My heart raced with excitement. An internship at Harrington & Company Investments was exactly the opportunity I had been hoping for. A chance to prove my worth and gain invaluable experience in high-stakes finance. "I'd be honored," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite my enthusiasm. "I won't let you down." The internship was grueling, with long hours and high expectations, but I thrived in the fast-paced environment. Edward was a demanding mentor, valuing results above all else. He didn't care about where you came from, only what you brought to the table. My first major task was to prepare a pitch for a tech startup specializing in AI-driven financial analytics. Edward believed it had the potential to disrupt the industry. He handed me a stack of documents, gave me a brief rundown, and left the rest to me. I spent countless hours poring over the details, crafting a pitch that emphasized the company's unique strengths and market potential. When the day of the pitch arrived, I stood in front of a room full of investors, my heart pounding. I could feel their skepticism, but I held my ground, confident in the research I had done. As I concluded, there was a moment of silence before Edward spoke. "Thank you, James. That was impressive," he said, turning to the investors. "So, who's ready to put their money where their mouth is?" One investor raised a hand. "I'll start with £50,000. A rush of adrenaline surged through me. I had done it, secured an investment, proved my worth, and taken a significant step toward building a career that could finally set me apart from my brother. Shadows. Undertwid. While I immersed myself in my internship, Henry and Isabella continued introducing me to London's high society. Henry, who lived in the affluent neighborhood of Knightsbridge, once took me on a tour of the area. The streets were lined with opulent mansions and sleek penthouses, each more extravagant than the last. "This is where the real power players live," Henry said, gesturing toward a modern building housing some of London's most luxurious apartments. "It's not just about money here. It's about influence, about who you know, and how well you can navigate the game." I listened intently, feeling both awe and determination. I wanted this life, wanted to be part of this elite world. I knew it would take time and effort, but I was willing to do whatever it took. As the weeks passed, my confidence grew. I wasn't just a bystander in this world anymore. I was an active participant. I attended exclusive events, dined at restaurants where a single meal cost more than a month's rent, and rubbed shoulders with celebrities and politicians. London had become my playground, a city of endless possibilities, and I was determined to seize every opportunity. I was building connections, laying the foundation for a future that was entirely mine. For the first time, I felt free of Robert's shadow, free to forge my own path and create my own legacy. Standing on the top floor of Harrington and Company, looking out over the city, I knew that this was only the beginning. This was my world now, a world of power, wealth, and opportunity, and I was ready to claim my place in it. My dedication and persistence began to bear fruit. I received a substantial promotion along with a significant salary increase, pushing my annual earnings comfortably into 6 figures. This newfound success brought with it greater responsibilities, placing me in meetings with high-level executives and giving me opportunities to pitch ideas directly to senior management. The satisfaction of earning my place at the table was unparalleled. I was no longer the young man living in his brother's shadow. I was James Carter, a rising star in the financial world. For the first time, I felt like I was becoming the person I was always meant to be. But I wasn't satisfied with just that. I wanted more, wanted to broaden my scope beyond the banking world. That's when I started exploring real estate and the opportunities within London's high-end property market. I had seen how much wealth could be generated in this field, and I was determined to leave my mark. Thanks to Isabella's network, I had access to a circle of luxury property developers and investors constantly seeking promising ventures. We often discussed the idea of collaborating, and now, with my financial expertise and her extensive connections, it seemed like the perfect time to make those conversations a reality. Together, we decided to invest in a prime real estate project in Mayfair, one of London's most prestigious neighborhoods. King Ting Thi, Tiuki. The property we acquired was a stunning Georgian townhouse with grand archways, high ceilings, and an unmistakable air of historic elegance. We purchased it for £3 million, envisioning its transformation into luxury apartments designed for the city's elite. The project was ambitious, but I was confident it would be a success. Isabella and I spent countless hours refining our vision. We collaborated with architects, meticulously reviewed designs, and ensured every detail reflected the exclusivity and luxury we wanted to offer. This wasn't just a business venture for me, it was an opportunity to create something tangible that would symbolize my achievements. Key. As the renovations progressed, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in a long time. I dedicated myself to the project with the same determination that had propelled me through UCL and Barclays. It wasn't long before the media caught wind of our work. Soon, my name began appearing in business publications and newspapers alongside features about the Mayfair property. I was no longer just an up-and-coming banker. I had transitioned into a real estate investor and entrepreneur making waves in London's luxury market. The recognition was surreal. It validated all the effort I had poured into my work and confirmed that I had finally escaped my brother's shadow. When my face appeared on the cover of London Business Weekly, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. The article celebrated my journey from being the overlooked younger sibling to becoming a successful entrepreneur in one of the world's most competitive cities. I read every word of that piece multiple times, savoring each line that acknowledged me for who I had become, not for who I was related to. With the spotlight came increased scrutiny and pressure to sustain my achievements. As the Mayfair project neared completion, I knew the upcoming months would be critical. We had invested millions, and I was determined to ensure a return that would cement my reputation as a savvy businessman. I began reaching out to potential buyers, offering exclusive tours of the property. The apartments were a perfect blend of modern sophistication and historic charm, boasting marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and bespoke finishes. They were designed for the most discerning clientele, and I knew they would appeal to London's wealthiest residents. As the offers started rolling in, I felt the same rush of excitement I had experienced during my early days at Barclays. By the time we sold the final unit, we had made a profit of £1 million. The project was a resounding success, further solidifying my position as an accomplished entrepreneur. The recognition didn't stop there. I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, sharing my story with aspiring entrepreneurs eager to follow in my footsteps. I had become someone people admired, a self-made man whose success wasn't tethered to his brother's name. London had transformed for me. It was no longer just a city. It was my stage, a platform from which I could continue building and pushing myself to greater heights. I had formed valuable connections, established my own identity, and created a life that was entirely mine. Standing on the rooftop of the Mayfair property, looking out over the sprawling city, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. In the days leading up to my return to New York, I had imagined every detail of my homecoming. I pictured the pride in my parents' eyes when they saw how far I had come, and the moment I could finally stand beside Robert as his equal. But nothing could have prepared me for the actual encounter. Robert had invited me to lunch at one of his favorite rooftop restaurants, offering breathtaking views of Manhattan. The city stretched endlessly before us, a powerful symbol of ambition and success. As we sat down, he seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my life in London, the people I associated with, the projects I was working on. For the first time in years, it felt like we were just two brothers catching up, sharing the stories that had shaped our journeys. We discussed my ventures in real estate, my burgeoning business opportunities, and even some of the glamorous events I had attended. I could sense that Robert was impressed, though there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite decipher. As our conversation wound down, Robert grew quiet. His gaze drifted over the cityscape before he finally spoke. "You know, James," he said, his tone reflective, "I never thought you'd actually leave. When you said you were going to London, I assumed it was just a phase." "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," Robert admitted, leaning back in his chair. His tone was casual, but I could sense the weight of his words. I studied his face, searching for the intention behind his statement. "I had to," I replied firmly, my voice steady. "I needed to get out from under your shadow and figure out who I was on my own." He nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I see that now. But back then, I guess I thought it was just you being impulsive, trying to prove a point. I didn't think you'd actually make something of yourself." Though I knew he didn't mean it as an insult, his words stung. They reflected the low expectations that had always surrounded me. The idea that I was destined to remain the overlooked younger sibling. For years, I had lived in the shadow of my brother's successes, always feeling like I fell short. But now, sitting across from him, I could see a shift in his perception. Robert was starting to see me in a new light. "I know I was always the afterthought," I said, my tone calm but resolute. "I know I was the one who wasn't supposed to succeed. But that's exactly why I had to leave, to prove to myself that I could be someone without you, without being compared to you every step of the way." Robert let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "James, it was never about you not measuring up," he said, his voice soft but earnest. "I know it felt that way, but it wasn't about you. It was about me, about the expectations Dad had for me, the pressure I put on myself to live up to them. You got caught in the middle of all that, and for that, I'm sorry." I was taken aback, my mind racing to process his unexpected candor. This was a side of Robert I had never seen before, a vulnerability hidden beneath the confident, self-assured facade he had always worn. For as long as I could remember, Robert had been the golden child, seemingly unshakable. But now, I saw a man grappling with his own doubts and insecurities. "You don't need to apologize," I said, my voice softening. "I understand you had your own pressures, your own challenges. But for me, it always felt like I was playing second fiddle. Like no matter what I did, it would never be enough." He nodded, meeting my gaze with a steady, sincere look. "I get that now. I should have done more to support you, to encourage you. But I was so caught up in my own success, my own need to prove myself, that I didn't see how it was affecting you. I didn't realize you needed the space to grow, to find your own way." His words lingered between us, heavy with unspoken truths. For the first time, I felt a sense of relief, as though a weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. This was what I had needed all along. Not just validation, but understanding. In my quest to escape Robert's shadow and prove my worth, I had never stopped to consider that he might have felt the same pressures I did. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the city and the clinking of dishes around us filling the quiet. The tension that had once defined our relationship began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of camaraderie, a bond that had been tested but not broken. "So, what's next for you?" Robert asked, his tone lighter now, curiosity evident in his expression. "You've built something incredible in London. Are you planning to stay there, or are you thinking about coming back to New York?" I shrugged, a smile spreading across my face as I considered his question. "I'm not sure yet. I love London, but there's a part of me that still feels tied to New York. I've been thinking about expanding here, maybe investing in property, starting a new venture. I want to see what I can build now that I've got a solid foundation." Robert nodded, his own smile forming as he reached for his glass. "To new ventures, then," he said, raising it in a toast. "And to finally stepping out of the shadows." I raised my glass to meet his, our eyes locking for a brief moment. "To new ventures," I echoed, feeling a rush of excitement. For the first time, New York didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a city full of opportunities waiting to be explored. It was no longer defined by Robert's accomplishments, but by my own ambitions and dreams. As we finished our drinks, Robert leaned back, his expression contemplative. "You know, James, I've always been proud of you," he said, his voice carrying a rare note of sincerity. "I may not have shown it, but I have. What you've done, it's incredible. You've proven to me and to everyone else that you're not just my younger brother. You're your own man, and that's something to be proud of." A lump formed in my throat, emotions threatening to overwhelm me. For so long, I had craved his approval, longed for him to see me as his equal. And now, he was giving me exactly what I had worked so hard to achieve. "Thanks, Robert," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." We stayed a little longer, reminiscing about our childhood, laughing over old memories, and sharing stories of our respective journeys. It felt like a turning point, a moment of reconciliation that had been years in the making. We had both grown, both changed, and for the first time, we saw each other as equals, as brothers. As we stood to leave, Robert clapped a hand on my shoulder, his grip reassuring. "I'm glad you're back, James. I'm glad we had this talk." "Me too," I said, feeling a newfound sense of peace. "I'll see you around." He nodded, a grin spreading across his face as he turned to leave. "You will. And James, don't be a stranger. We're family, after all." I watched him walk away, satisfaction settling over me as I realized I had achieved what I had set out to do. I had proven myself, not just to the world, but to Robert. I had carved my own path, established my own identity, and was finally free to create a life entirely my own. As I stepped out onto the bustling streets of Manhattan, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The city stretched out before me, vast and brimming with possibilities. I was no longer defined by my brother's success. I was James Carter, a man who had claimed his place in the world, earned his family's respect, and was ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. He hadn't anticipated this. Robert hadn't expected me to return as someone who had forged his own path, achieved success independently, and stepped out of his shadow. Well, look at you," Robert said with a wide grin, pulling me into a hug. "I heard you were doing well, but I didn't realize just how well." I matched his smile, feeling a wave of satisfaction. "It's been a good few years," I replied, keeping my tone casual. "London's treated me well." As we settled down to catch up, I began sharing stories of my life overseas. I spoke about the people I'd met, the deals I'd closed, and the investments I'd made. I told him about the Mayfair project, the accolades it had brought me, and the feature in London Business Weekly that had solidified my place among successful entrepreneurs. For the first time, I saw genuine respect in Robert's eyes, a recognition that I was no longer the younger brother stuck in his shadow. "That's impressive, James," he said thoughtfully, nodding as he processed everything I'd told him. "Sounds like you've really made a name for yourself." "I have," I said, holding his gaze. "I've built something that's entirely mine, untethered from anyone else's achievements." We talked late into the night, reminiscing about the past and exchanging stories about our journeys. This new dynamic between us felt unfamiliar, but welcome. For the first time, I sensed that Robert saw me as an equal, not just his little brother. It was a feeling I had long chased, and now that I had it, it was more fulfilling than I had ever imagined. The following day, I began planning the next chapter of my life, expanding my business to New York. While I had established a strong foundation in London, I knew New York was where I wanted to plant my next flag. This city, where my journey had begun, now called to me, not as a place to escape, but as a territory to conquer. I purchased a luxury condominium in Manhattan, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the city. The price, $5 million, was steep, but it was more than just a home. It was a statement, a symbol of the success I had achieved and the life I was building. Closing the deal brought a rush of pride as I signed the papers, marking my new claim on the city that had once felt suffocating. The Manhattan condo became my headquarters, a space where I could host meetings, entertain clients, and plan my next ventures. I reached out to contacts in New York, arranged meetings, explored investment opportunities, and set the groundwork for this new phase of my career. My goal was clear: to leave a lasting impression on this city, to establish myself as a force in both London and New York. To celebrate this new chapter, I organized an extravagant party at the condo, inviting friends from London, my family, and the connections I had begun to forge in New York. I wanted to commemorate this milestone, not just my return, but the transformation I had undergone. I was no longer the man who had left. I was someone entirely new. The night of the party, the condo buzzed with lively conversation, clinking glasses, and bursts of laughter from guests who had come to celebrate my accomplishments. Isabella flew in from London, as did Henry, and together we raised a toast to our shared journey, cherished memories, and the promising future ahead. Robert was there too, mingling with the crowd, pride evident in his smile as he introduced me to his friends and colleagues. Seeing him in my space, surrounded by people who knew me as more than just Robert's brother, was a strange but deeply satisfying moment. I was no longer just James Carter, the overshadowed younger sibling. I was James Carter, a man who had built his own empire, earned his place in the world of wealth and influence, and stepped into his own light. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing by the massive windows, looking out over the city. Manhattan, which had once felt like a cage, now appeared as a stage, a platform for further growth, expansion, and ambition. I had come full circle, returning to New York not as someone seeking validation, but as someone who had already proven himself. The party stretched late into the night. As I looked around at the faces of the people who had become part of my journey, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. I had broken free from Robert's shadow, demonstrating to myself and the world that I was capable of standing on my own. I was no longer defined by my relation to someone else. I was my own person, with my own achievements, legacy, and identity. When the last guest had left, I stood alone in the quiet condo, gazing at the glittering city lights. A deep gratitude washed over me for the challenges I had faced, the doubts I had overcome, and the success I had built. The shadow that had once loomed over me was gone, replaced by a light that was entirely my own. I was James Carter, a man who had crafted his own empire, claimed his own success, and prepared to keep pushing the boundaries of possibility. Returning to New York on my terms, with my own identity, accomplishments, and vision for the future, was a victory in itself. I was no longer a man defined by someone else's greatness. I had become greatness in my own right. As I stood there, looking out at the city that had once confined me, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. And I was more than prepared to embrace it, to continue building a life that was wholly and authentically mine.